On behalf of the California Technology Agency, I'd like to welcome you all to our 6th and final public meeting regarding Next Generation 911 in California. I'm Karen Wong, Deputy Director, Public Safety Communications Office. Today's meeting is being taped and will be posted on the California Technology Agency website. The purpose of the public meetings regarding Next Generation 911 is to engage and encourage stakeholders and the public to provide input and share their future expectations of Next Generation 911. The Public Safety Communications Office completed the 911 Emergency Communications Plan in July of 2010 and recently completed the Next Generation 9-1-1 Roadmap. First and foremost, I want to say that the current 911 system is not broken. The current system has been in place for over 40 years. We're moving toward Next Generation 911 due to the advancements in technology. Next Generation 911 will provide the ability to accept multimedia data, text, video, and photo, improve interoperability, and 911 call routing. It is important as we move forward that we understand stakeholder and public expectations. Our panel members today are Ryan Doolin, Chief, California 911 Communications Office. Ryan joined the Public Safety Communications Office as the Chief over the 911 program in October 2010. Chief Reginald Chappelle is a 25-year veteran of the California Highway Patrol. He is currently assigned to the CHP's Information Management Division as Chief Information Officer. Chief Chappelle provides oversight for the CHP's information technology and telecommunications applications and infrastructure, communication center support, and computer crimes investigation unit. Chris Henshaw, 911 Advisory Board member, is retired from the San Diego County Sheriff's Department in 2008. Chris Henshaw is a member of the President of the California chapter of the National Emergency Number Association, and is a member of the Association of Public Safety Communication Officials, the National Fire Coordinating Group, and the California Fire Scope Communication Specialist Group. Police Chief Eric Hopley of the Ontario Police Department has over 25 years' experience in law enforcement and has worked through the ranks of every major division within the department. Division Chief John Salvate, has over 27 years in fire service in California. He currently serves as Vice President of the Inland Empire Fire Explorers Association. Today's agenda includes 6 presentations relative to Next Generation 911, as well as provides the opportunity for public comment. Since these meetings are limited to 3 hours, the following will be the rules for today's meeting. Each presentation will be limited to 10 minutes. There'll be a 5 minutes after the presentation for questions by the panel, as well as response by the presenter. After the presentations conclude, we will then open it up for public comments. If anyone wishes to provide public comments, must sign up in advance. And so if you do want to make some public comments, please sign up with Judy Casada. She's in the back there. And we will have you on the list for the public comments. I'd like to check with the panel members if there's any questions or comments before we begin. Okay. Our first presenter is Jeremy Smith, Senior Consultant with L.R. Kimball and Lead Consultant on the State of California's 911 Next Generation Roadmap.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. We're good to go with the audio-visual, Paul? Good microphone? Okay, perfect. As Karen mentioned, my name is Jeremy Smith, and I'm a consultant for L.R. Kimball. We thought that it would be useful to provide a national update on the progress behind Next Generation 911. You guys hear me okay? We use this one? Is that better? All right. I almost had to use my Marine voice there for a second. I told Paul that I'd go into DI mode if I had to. So, anyway, we thought that it would be useful to have a presentation on Next Generation 911 from a national perspective to just sort of give you a sense of what's going on at the national level. Ryan's going to talk about the state perspective, and so we'll look at a couple of the different things that are going on. Let's hit the next slide here. All right. One of the things that I think it's important to make sure that we all understand very clearly is that 911 today is not broken. It was initially designed to do one thing, and that's to take calls from 3-digit dialing from a fixed location. Now, we made some modifications over the year to support the changes in the consumer environment, such as camera trucks that brought us Annie. We had wireless, phase 1, phase 2. I'm sure many of you have dealt with that. And ultimately voice over IP, but all of these were more square peg, round hole kinds of solutions. Simply put, the legacy 911 platform, while capable, is not designed to support the new technologies that we need in a new environment, such as texting, the ability to receive texts from text to 911. There's minimal data that's made available to the call taker. We know your location, we know where, your phone number, but we don't know a whole lot other than that. We can't send things like a picture if we have a picture of the incident. We can't send a video of the incident if that might help. Another thing that we can't do very well is call congestion overflow routing, where you might have one call center that is overloaded at call volume. Say it's 2 a.m., the bars have let out, and all of a sudden the call volume spikes. Well, there's no way to really automatically roll a call over to another PSAP that may not have as many calls at the time. Some of these limitations are just subject to the nature of the design of our core platform, and sort of have created a need for a next-gen environment. So let's talk about what next-gen is. Sometimes it's easier to talk about what next-gen isn't. A lot of times folks will think that next-gen is simply just a network, that it's just an IP-enabled network. I have IP-enabled CPE, I'm good to go, I have next-gen. And while IP-enabled networks and IP-enabled CPE are critical and important, they're integral elements of a next-gen solution, next-gen ultimately comprises far more than that. It contains all of the functions of that legacy 911 system while allowing for greater interoperability, allowing you to utilize different forms of communication to initiate requests for help to the system. I think if you look at the wheel at the right there, what is probably the more interesting question is not what is next-gen, but what do you have to address in a next-gen 911 environment. And that diagram on the right, you'll notice that there's two wheels. If you look at the inner wheel tends to be more technology-focused. Things like cybersecurity, which, as you'll learn in one of the later presentations, is a very important requirement in a next-gen environment to make sure that we're secure. The GIS data has to be addressed in a next-gen environment, as does an IP-enabled network. But I think the circle on the outside is the far more interesting circle to look at. And that is the operations, the governance. Governance being, of course, how decisions get made. In a next-gen 911 environment, we might have multiple PSAPs connected together. We will have multiple PSAPs connected together. But when we do that, we now have to understand how the decision of one PSAP to accept a particular type of next-gen technology might impact another. And so we have to make sure we understand how decisions get made. From an operational perspective, you're probably going to hear some presentations about things that companies like OnStar and ATX can do. And you'll learn that there's some really exciting things that can be done, but we have to make sure we understand the operational impact to the PSAP. And for example, it's one thing that we can take a video of an incident that's happening, but what is the impact to the dispatcher or the call taker who now has to see somebody commit suicide on camera, who now has to see these kinds of events? So we have to look at those things and understand, is there training that has to happen? Is there, post-stress traumatic, training that needs to happen? Certainly strategic planning and policies, we could talk for hours about that. So to the update part. First and foremost, there is no formal mandate for next generation 911. What's driving it though is consumers. Consumers like my 15-year-old daughter who has a cell phone, which she's currently grounded from, by the way, which is a great way to deal with teenagers, I've found. But when she's not grounded with that, from that phone, if she wanted to communicate with 911, her probably first response would have been to text 911. I've since explained to her that she can't do that. But there's no mandate for that, but that's the primary way that she and her peers want to communicate. That's what's starting to drive this, and not to mention all of the technology changes, the rapid improvements that we have in technology that allow us to do the kinds of things that we find ourselves talking about in a NextGen 911 environment. NextGen is still in development. There are no fully NextGen 911 compliant systems deployed in their entirety. There are components, there are products that are being developed. Vendors have different solutions out in the field. You may have seen that the FCC recently closed a notice of inquiry. They asked for comments from the public, kind of like the state of California is doing here. They asked for public feedback on NextGen. There are a lot of planning stages underway. Folks all across the country are in various stages of planning. They're looking at creating strategic plans, looking at their tariffs, looking at how much can we afford based on the funding structure that we have now. They're looking at things like their existing network infrastructure. One of the things that California has is a microwave network. California has invested a significant amount of money into that microwave network. There's sunk costs there. Those kinds of networks have to be analyzed, and that's what folks across the country are starting to do, is look at those kinds of networks where there's already sunk costs and see if there's a way to maximize that investment that has already been made. Folks are looking at security already. Folks are looking at security from the perspective of, let's build it now before we have NextGen to make sure that we don't try to bolt security on after the fact, weave it right into the process from the outset. Certainly they're looking at GIS, they're looking at governance, they're looking at legislation to make sure that the legislative models that encompass 911 are being modified to support NextGen 911. And ultimately, a lot of folks are implementing IP-enabled networks that they're using as the foundation to start their transition to NextGen 911. If you look at these two graphs here, and it may be difficult to see for some of you in the back of the room, but they sort of kind of give you a perspective of some of the different planning efforts from a nationwide perspective. The slide on the left is folks or states that have started to embark upon some sort of planning, at least as we define planning, meaning at their state level 911 office. If they have one, they've started to define some sort of a formal planning effort. The slide on the right is folks that are have begun some sort of deployment, a limited deployment perhaps. You'll see that the lime green, like California's lime green, that's referring to the Northeast Grant Project up in the northeastern part of California, where they're deploying an IP-enabled network to start some NextGen type activities. So you can see that there's quite a lot going on. I think what is probably the more interesting slide is this one, and you can see that there is no one across the country who is completely and fully NextGen compliant today. A lot of times folks, when they see that, will then ask me, all right, well then who's going to be first? And a lot of times when I'm here in California, folks ask me, well, when is California going to be? Are we ahead? Are we behind? Where are we at? And I think that's the two interesting questions. I'll take the first one, the first part of that first. Who's going to be first? Probably somebody like a Texas or maybe a smaller state, these other states that have been out in front of this for quite a while. The second question is, where's California at? Are you ahead or are you behind? The answer is you're right in the middle. You're not ahead, you're not behind, you're right in the middle. As you can see, there are plenty of states that haven't started much of anything yet, and you guys are moving pretty fast. So what are some other states doing? Let's talk about Texas. Texas, as I mentioned, is pretty well down the road. They are currently going through a procurement right now to buy some IP-enabled networks. They have kind of an interesting model of government out there that they're broken up into these regional areas. So the way that Texas is ultimately going to do it is they're going to have regional networks that will then ultimately be stitched together by a statewide network that will support all of their NextGen capabilities. They've released what's called a master plan, which is sort of the functional definition of NextGen for the state of Texas. That's actually out on the web. You guys can go look at it. And they're looking at things like governance. When you have a state as big as Texas, and this certainly applies to California as well, with all of the different geography and all of the different regions and politics and things that come into play, governance, or again, how things get done, how things get decided, is critical. Michigan has an existing 911, existing IP-enabled network that they've been looking at. They've started to look at legislation and funding to develop their network. They've also started to define their functional requirements of what NextGen will mean in the state of California. Some other states here, just sort of a laundry list of other states. State of Minnesota has an IP-enabled network that they're looking at. The state of Tennessee, again, has an existing network that they've been examining. Massachusetts recently started the planning process, recently being sort of a relative term. They're actually a little bit farther down that road now. Maryland is doing something a little bit similar to Michigan. Colorado recently started the planning process. Kansas started the planning process, and actually now they're moving into the pilot phase. They're starting to lay out the plans for a pilot, a 3PSAT pilot in Kansas. Washington has actually completed their planning. They have, actually this slide needs to be corrected. They've moved past the pilot phase, and they actually have about, I believe, a third of their PSAPs deployed, connected to an IP-enabled network where the selective router is not present anymore, and they're doing full-blown routing, which is pretty powerful, pretty compelling story. So again, just to summarize here, as I mentioned, there's really no formal mandate for NextGen 911. There's no formal mandate. There's nobody saying, there's no law, there's no regulation yet. But the folks like my 15-year-old daughter are driving this technology, and the technology itself is driving it. The technology that comprises the 911 system that we know today is antiquated and it's old. And while it is a capable system, it needs to be replaced, and that's where NextGen comes in. So hopefully that was helpful to just give you kind of a national perspective, and in a minute Ryan's going to talk about it from a local perspective. Any questions or comments from the board?
No questions from the panel?
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next presenter is Ryan Doolin, Chief, California 911 Emergency Communications.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ryan Doolin, Chief of the 911 Office for the State of California. Jeremy talked a little bit about NextGen over the nation, and California is really getting out there and starting to make some traction. So when Jeremy talks about California is neither ahead or behind, or who's going to be the first to actually implement this in the state, my goal right now, after coming on board in October of 2010, is really put California on the map as respect to next generation 911. And not just that, being the first out to implement next generation 911, but to actually do it right, to reach out to our stakeholders across the state, to the public, to our dispatch centers, and to all of our stakeholders. So that's what we're trying to get from these public meetings. I want to go over current 911 environment, what California is doing to transition to next generation 911, and as we roll out 911, what might that look like in California, and just to show that California is falling behind what they have at the national level. Currently in California, you'll see by the stats that we're not like Rhode Island, we're not like Texas, we're not like Michigan. We are California, and we have a lot of residents to take care of and to make sure that they have access to 911. We also have demographics across the state that are unique and really need to take into consideration the amount of visitors as well as just our citizens that come to California that will need 911 services. So in 2010, we have 37 million residents. That's not including all the visitors that I spoke of. We cover about 163,000 square miles, go from the deserts all the way up to the mountaintops. This office oversees 465 PSAPs statewide, which are the public safety answering points, otherwise known as the dispatch centers. We answered 23.8 million calls, 911 calls last year, and that attributed to all of the dispatchers, communication supervisors, and also the first responders that are responsible for all the public safety in California. 16.6 million of those calls were wireless, and that shows a trend that we're moving from wireline technology to the wireless and giving mobility throughout California across those 163,000 miles. We have to ensure that when somebody is in a part of the state that they have access to 911 and that we can actually get that call to a dispatch center and get first responders rolling. On any given day, there are 65,000 911 calls in California, and when you compare some of these stats, 465 PSAPs, some states have 39, some states have 6. So it kind of shows the magnitude of what we're doing in California. And because of our demographics, we for 911 calls, we translate those into approximately 91 different languages. So as we expand our capabilities for 911, we also have to consider what we're going to have to do as far as when text messages or video. We have to make sure that we're realizing what the demographics of California are. As Jeremy mentioned, the current California 911 environment, we don't have the infrastructure, or the legacy infrastructure doesn't allow for processing of the newer technologies. We don't have capabilities for text messages, videos, or photos. We're unable to deal with call congestion and backup capabilities outside of local jurisdictions, so we're not able to automatically or dynamically transfer those calls based on business rules. And the location accuracy needs to be improved. We want to really make sure that the call goes to the right PSAP the first time. So that location accuracy is really important to us when routing 911 calls. And as Kimball graphically represented the essential elements to next generation 911, current NextGen 911 efforts in California are also following that same model. We want to make sure we have some current efforts underway, starting with the strategic plan that was published last year, July 2010, with 3 major themes in that strategic plan, one being heavily weighted in NextGen 911, making sure that we are collaborating and reaching out to our key stakeholders statewide. And the public education and outreach component is making sure that we let our citizens know when and how to interact with 911 and when to call for emergency services and use that 911 number. At the end of last year in December, we conducted a statewide PSAP NextGen survey across the state. We wanted to make sure that we understood from a PSAP's perspective what the issues were, what the concerns are, and also what obstacles they may face or just what's on their mind. We also published the proposed California NextGen 911 Roadmap. That is our tactical approach to NextGen 911 and kind of identifying all the elements that we need to put into place and implement when we roll out this technology and process and capability across the state. And then we're also conducting February, March, this is our last one, the 6 public meetings, and that includes, we spanned from Northern California all the way down to Southern California and reaching out to the public to make sure that we gather the comments and we identify if there are any gaps or things that we didn't think about in our roadmap and include those as we get NextGen underway. So as Jeremy had mentioned, those components for NextGen, we're also considering the regulatory legislative funding mechanism in California, which is the CETNA fund. That is the statewide emergency telephone number account, and that is what funds based on a surcharge tax on each phone in California. That's what funds the infrastructure to move towards and provide 911 services. One of our first initiatives and the technical foundation of NextGen 911 is really, or is going to be, and is our E911 grant project. That's going on currently right now in the northeastern part of California. Our time frame, we started in September 2009, and we will conclude the project in September 2012. We have $8.6 million in federal and state matching grant funds to carry out this project, proof of concept for NextGen 911. And as of December 2010, we have 3 PSAPs, Gridley, Oroville, and Paradise Police Department on the IP hosted solution. And I believe this week we lit up another site, which was CAL FIRE in that area. Some other preliminary NextGen 911 efforts that are underway are Imperial County, Ventura County, Pasadena, and Mendocino County areas, where we're in different phases of those projects, starting initial planning and discussions, and making sure that when we put these hosted solutions in, we're picking the right solutions, and we're understanding the business needs across California, as well as at the PSAP and dispatch center level. This slide you'll see many times, maybe today, or just as people talk about NextGen 911. We wanted to represent that California is following in the steps of what the federal government and industry see as moving towards NextGen. And as you can tell, where we rely on voice calls today, in the next generation environment, we're going to be moving to voice, text, and video capability all in the one system. We're going to have advanced data sharing capabilities across PSAPs. We're going to be routing callers dynamically based on the location of an individual and call congestion across the system. And also be able to deal with dynamically rerouting of callers when there's potential outages and the inability to answer 911 calls. And I want to wrap up my presentation as really a call to action. The state of California is looking to engage, participate, and share the input with all of the stakeholders and the public throughout the state. We are concluding these public meetings today, and attached to that public meeting notice are 15 questions spanning on what the state of California wants to know and incorporate into the NextGen solution. Those comments are due from the public, stakeholders, and industry on March 18th. So just in a couple of weeks, and I'm asking that everybody weigh in on those, look at those questions. You don't have to answer all of the questions. If there's one area of interest, go ahead and submit your comments according to the instructions on the public meeting notice. So that concludes my presentation, and does the panel have any questions?
Ryan, I have one. Just I know the public's format on this. You talked a little bit about Setna. I know there's going to be a lot of questions about the fiscal end of funding the changes and the needs and what we're going to do at the local level. Can you expand upon that a little bit?
Yeah, right now Setna does provide funding for the local municipalities to provide 911 services. Part of our roadmap is really to do an analysis, a thorough analysis, and also work with our advisory board members as well as the state offices to see what funding mechanisms that we're going to need. Karen has us currently working on a cost of magnitude of what actually is this going to cost the state. And I think once we start doing that and have a thorough analysis, then we'll be able to share that information, see the impacts on the local level, how can the state fund that, and also other instruments that are out there, grant projects for the regional networks. And so I think there's a lot more questions than there are answers in that area, but funding is one of those key components that we're taking a look at.
Yeah, Ryan, an observation on one of the issues you brought up. One of the technology problems that we're having to deal with here, when you talked about accuracy of the caller location for routing purposes to get it to the right PSAP. One of the technology issues we have to look at here is the capability. That's an IP stream. That's a lot of data coming down there. We have to look at more than just being able to route it to the right PSAP. We have to know the location where the caller's coming, the caller's located. So that information can go out to the first responder. Right now we can give them an XY coordinate that'll get them, if we're lucky, within 3 or 4 meters. But we're not able to do three-dimensional yet. With the enhancements that we're able to do, the technology on the networks, if we can give them a three-dimensional location information, then we can start talking about basements, sub-basements, multi-story buildings, aircraft, those types of issues, the side of a mountain, those kinds of things that are a lot more important to the first responder than just getting it to the right PSAP.
Yeah, and one thing in the state of California, latitude, longitude, and altitude are definitely things that we need to consider in moving to NextGen. We really want to participate on those advisory committees and also standards bodies that, because of the location information, depending on what technology you're using and what standard you're going by, could vary. So we really want the industry to standardize that across the industry and be participatory at those standards bodies. So.
Any more questions from the panel? Okay. Our next presenter, thank you very much, Ryan. Our next presenter is Catherine McCormick, Public Policy Manager for OnStar ATX.
Opportunity to be here today. My name is Kathy McCormick. I am a Public Policy Manager for OnStar. But I'm proud to say my career prior to joining OnStar was 20 years running a PSAP just outside of Detroit. So I think I'm keenly aware of some of the issues that we're discussing here today. Fortunately, OnStar and ATX have worked very closely since our inception in the late 1990s to make sure that we never compete in the area of public safety, which is why we are able to make a presentation on behalf of each other's companies during this 6 hearing process. Just wanted to give you an idea between the 2 companies what kind of call volume we do on an annual basis. Some of the services we are able to support customers with is automatic crash response. About 24,000 times a month we assist customers who have been involved in a crash. About 1,800 times those crashes occur in the state of California. From an emergency services perspective, this would be a red emergency key press for an emergency in the vehicle about 120,000 times annually, about 3,700 times annually here in California. Good Samaritan calls, about 75,000 times a year. We assist people who want to help others outside of their vehicle. And you can see there's quite a few Good Samaritans, over 10,000 annually here in California. A very good example I can give you is reporting of wildfires. And here in Southern California, we've worked very closely with San Diego County in the evacuation of residents during wildfires. And we are able to actually hook directly into some of their automated systems so that we can take some of the burden off of them if people key press in for information during an evacuation or other such emergency here in Southern California. We also can assist law enforcement in locating stolen vehicles. About 4,800 times annually we do that. We can remotely unlock doors, and we can assist with roadside problems. The reason I bring those couple of what appear to not be emergency services up here is that we believe we can assist public safety if there's a child locked in a vehicle by quickly unlocking it, and also to keep the roadways clear and safe. As you can see, we've got about 364,000 active subscribers here in California and close to now 6 million customers, US and Canada. To give you an idea, the types of vehicles that have embedded telematics, GM solely owns OnStar, and all of GM's retail products are OnStar equipped standard. We recently spun off Saab last year, but we continue to support their drivers with telematics. And we announced in Las Vegas in January the ability to buy an OnStar mirror soon at 3,000 retail outlets, so you can really put OnStar on anything in the future of a passenger vehicle nature. From an ATX perspective, they are representing Toyota, Lexus, Hyundai, and BMW. Both of these companies are supported by a private call center so that we are not sending unnecessary calls into 911 centers that might come in on a red key press. We all know that Johnny having to use the bathroom is not an emergency, even though they may elect to push the red emergency button to get information on where the restroom might be located. From an ATX perspective, They also have a service to receive automatic crash calls approximately 11,000 times annually. About 19,000 times annually they have a red emergency key press. They also assist law enforcement with stolen vehicle recovery, do unlocks, and also roadside assistance. So they have approximately 1.3 million customers. So between the two companies, we're upwards around 7.5 million active customers in the U.S. and Canada. I do anticipate that we will see more telematics-equipped vehicles becoming standard. I believe that just about every auto manufacturer is talking about having some sort of connection from a vehicle. And research shows that most people purchase a telematics-equipped vehicle for peace of mind, safety and security, and especially now when we're seeing many states that are restricting the use of handheld cell phones, this is a great service to rely upon. Just to give you an idea, and our focus today will be on automatic crash response because that is really the key intersection point in the next generation of 911. So today if a crash occurs, we receive a voice and data connection to the telematics service provider call center, to one of our call centers. We have a very comprehensive and accurate database as well as very precise GPS location on that vehicle. So we're proud to say that we can reach the correct PSAP with jurisdiction almost always on that first attempt, and our call to them will be a voice call. And we will pass on information regarding the incident, and then obviously we will rely on the 911 centers here in California to make a decision on the appropriate dispatch of emergency response to that location. We did, since the inception of ATX and OnStar in the late 1990s, we have been able to receive an automatic crash call if airbags have deployed. Beginning in 2004, we evolved what was our next generation of crash notification. And so in a moderate to severe crash, we receive data from the vehicle, which would include the severity of the impact, whether or not the airbags deployed and which airbags, which side of the vehicle was struck, the severity of the impact, or in an engineering term, the delta velocity, and whether or not that vehicle may have rolled over. We believe this is all really great information and allows a dispatch center to make a more informed decision on who to dispatch, but it's also a lot of raw data that's very hard to interpret when time is of the essence. So an expert panel was seated under the auspices of the CDC and took into consideration all of those variables that are available from the vehicle. And now we are able to, using an algorithm, predict whether or not there's a high probability of a severe injury. We believe that if we can give this information to the dispatch center, their decision can be more informed, and they can either send a unit hot with advanced life support, or perhaps they'll make a decision to send a response, normal traffic, or perhaps only law enforcement needs to be sent to make a report. So overall, we believe that it will assist in keeping the roadways safer, not having emergency vehicles respond, lights and sirens if it's not necessary. We also believe that this data on the severity of the impact will allow first responders on scene to make decisions such as sending patients to a level 1 trauma center where we know there's a higher likelihood of survival if right treatment is sought in a timely basis. So in the future, we'll still have a data and voice connection to the vehicle. There has been some discussion about video. Not sure if that'll ever come to pass inside of a vehicle because, of course, we've got to juggle privacy and customer desire to have a camera in their vehicle, but it is possible in the future to get a look at that crash victim and let first responders see the victim. So that call will come into the call center. The crash data that I mentioned to you could potentially be sent to the public safety agency so that they aren't forced to take down all of that data in a more manual method. Also, the risk of severe injury could also be sent to them. And then ultimately, it may be possible to send imagery and the crash data to other stakeholders who may be part of that response chain, whether it be doctors that are receiving the patients at the trauma center, responding EMS, or law enforcement agencies. One of the things that I did not mention is we also have the ability to alert the dispatch center if this is an advanced propulsion vehicle. We've spent a lot of time here in California recently talking about the Chevrolet Volt and making sure first responders were prepared to respond to electric vehicle technology. And that concludes our portion. I'd be happy to take any questions from the panel.
I'd like to say that in my experience, what ATX and OnStar are doing is the way that telematics should be done. I came up in the PSAP in the days when we were getting flooded with burglar alarm calls and fire alarm calls and other automated systems calling the comm center, and 80% of those were falses. To have something like that occur from automated devices dialing 911 and going directly to the PSAP would be detrimental to the entire 911 system and to being able to make appropriate and rapid response to true emergencies. And the fact that OnStar and ATX have these calls routed through a call center and triaged before they come to the 911 center relieves a lot of that load off the comm center. And that's an appropriate thing from what I can see.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions from the panel? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next presenter is Brian Acosta, Dispatch Manager of Confire JPA, and is the County 911 Coordinator for San Bernardino County. In 2003, Brian successfully developed wireless phase 2 and voice over IP routing in San Bernardino.
Thank you, Karen. I'm here today to give you a perspective, or give the perspective of the dispatch center. What exactly is Next Generation 911? Does the public really have an idea of what Next Generation 911 is? Do the PSAPs know what it means? I believe the public expects to be able to dial 911 from any device at any time and expect a dispatcher to answer that call and know exactly where they are. With traditional landline calls, it's a very realistic expectation, and under most circumstances, the PSAPs are doing a wonderful job at that today. A definition of Next Generation 911 is very difficult to come up with. The public doesn't know what it means, and the PSAPs don't fully understand what it means yet. Those of us that deal with 911 on a daily basis don't even have a full understanding of Next Generation 911. The public expectation is still the same regardless of technologies or devices. The expectation is simple, and that's that 911 should grow as technology does. Texting is the primary choice communications of many of our younger generation. How many of you have teenagers at home that'll send you a text saying, "Hey, what's for dinner?" and they're sitting right next to you? Verbal communication skills have definitely declined drastically. Don't get me wrong, I think texting is wonderful, especially when needing to speak to your staff or family members when you're tied up in a meeting. But is texting really a reliable form, or even video messaging really a reliable form of emergency communication? SMS and instant messaging, things like BlackBerry Messenger, should probably not be relied on as a real-time communication service. Messages are stored in the network until the destination phone becomes available. That doesn't mean immediate delivery of that message. I think we've all sent a text and received that big red X indicating that it's not gone through, simply because you don't have service or the other user's phone is not on. Again, is SMS really a good choice for 911 in an emergency situation? There are quite a few concerns when it comes to texting to 911. Currently, mobile devices not authorized for voice services, or what we in the PSAP world refer to as throwaway phones that no longer have service, have the ability to contact 911, but they don't have the ability to text. Is the public aware of that? SMS messages receive no routing priority. Emergency message could be competing with millions of other messages processed at the same time. This could result in a delivery delay for potential emergency messages. No real location information is available. The location is completely reliant on the location provided by the sender. SMS was not designed with security mechanisms for a 911 requirement. Authentication of messages is not provided, making it easy to send fraudulent messages. This could include spoofing, spam, and hacking. In addition to all these things, dispatcher personnel would be required to learn a whole new language. OMG, my BFF is ROTFL. For those of you who aren't aware, oh my gosh, my best friend forever is rolling on the floor laughing. When dispatchers begin their career, they learn a whole new language, whether it's police, fire, or medical call types. It's definitely an entirely new language. In essence, text messaging would be yet another language that they would need to learn. Whether we like it or not, this kind of technology is coming and the public will be expecting it. Like the gentleman said earlier, his daughter is the one driving us behind, the driving force behind this. Personal communication devices continue to evolve at a rapid pace. However, changes in the 911 infrastructure often take years to implement. These are some of the issues the PSAP, or from my perspective, the PSAP perspective, that need to be addressed: funding, legislation, technology, security, and definitely education. First, let's start with funding. Like most everything else in life, the bottom line is funding, especially in these hard economic times. Although the legacy 911 system is very stable, and as the state commented earlier, it's just simply unable to support an IP-based technology. I don't think anyone knows what it will cost to update to the entire state of California to an IP-based infrastructure. Nationwide, we're seeing a trend in which individuals giving up the national landline phones for cell phones or some sort of wireless IP device service. Look at Magic Jack. It's $20 a year for your entire year of phone service. Why wouldn't you want to switch to something like that? We must establish a mechanism for collecting and distributing 911 funds, or it will create an undue burden for local government and the PSEPs to manage. Other funding concerns include the possible need of additional personnel at the center. Are we going to be inundated with more and more of these messages that I simply can't keep up with them? There are obviously still many questions left to be unanswered regarding funding. Legislation. As with most everything, there's legal issues that should be considered. Governance and policy are essential, and it is the only way to ensure a smooth and successful transition to a next-generation 911 network. Next-generation 911 offers the ability to interconnect other systems and databases to provide supplemental information such as medical, health, and as OnStar just described, some of their crash information. Not all of the dispatch centers, or not all of that information is widely available to all of our dispatch centers in an automated or electronic form. This raises issues of legal privacy and the need for next-generation systems to adequately address user access, data right management, and the ability to respond when there are compromised access issues. The challenge will be to develop legislation, proper system controls and capabilities, and business processes like how often is information provided and what information is provided, to minimize the concerns while balancing the need for data access against the right for privacy. As California establishes a standard for service, I hope we look to NENA for our direction. NENA, of course, is the National Emergency Number Association. The NENA standards have been developed in cooperation with PSAPs and providers from the user community. California must assure the level of service for 911 does not deteriorate due to the false or inappropriate usage of the 911 system. These safeguards will definitely require legislation and regulation. Technology. The next generation 911 network should be performance-based and technologically agnostic to manufacturers, vendors, and providers. The network should be capable of prioritizing critical traffic and have the ability to support multiple levels of prioritization. to ensure that most important applications or users have the access and bandwidth that they deserve and require. In the event of a disaster where security and public safety applications must have priority, the network should automatically adjust quality of service for that prioritization. The network should use some sort of traffic shaping or traffic policing to ensure that the network meets, preferably exceeds, performance standards. Basically, the system needs to be smart enough to route the call to the right PSAP at the right time. The network should support multiple levels of authentication. In addition, the network should detect any connection that is not encrypted. If it doesn't belong, it must be stopped. For security, NextGen 9-1-1 opens the door to allow numerous new devices and applications from multiple pathways to connect into our 911 system. Entities are interconnected together with IP-enabled networks. This dramatically increases the scale and types of threats now facing our public safety industry. PSAPs will continue to face traditional cyber threats such as viruses and hackers. Security concerns include address spoofing, denial of service, other suspected intrusions, undelivered or incomplete packets, physical security, and definitely security of the information that we receive. The Department of Transportation points out that security control issues for the NextGen 911 network can affect several different areas of the network, including connection gateway points to the PSAPs, to the IP access network, to the internet, and to other public networks, and to external databases potentially managed by other entities. There is a huge security concern. Obviously, a new network can't be designed and implemented overnight. The NextGen 911 network architecture will need to be designed to interface with various legacy and next generation systems. To ensure that the NextGen 911 system is secure, it is critical that security controls are established to mitigate security risks through the NextGen 911 network. The biggest one, at least in my mind, is education. The implementation of NextGen 911 will have a tremendous impact on our 911 dispatchers and our public safety answering points. All 911 system users will require training on the new system functionality. The users including PSAP personnel, third-party service providers, emergency responders, as well as the general public. The new system functionality is just the beginning. A dramatic increase in call or incident information is definitely going to be coming from NextGen 911. Dispatchers are going to be receiving emergency information from voice calls, TDY, TDD, cell phone calls, VoIP, as well as text, video, and still pictures. To prepare for the efficient processing of these new call types, call takers will be required to take additional training and probably screening. The following new procedures and processes probably need to be addressed. Processing text messages. Dispatchers will be required to receive and respond to the text messages received from the public. Like I explained earlier, citizens who are proficient in texting use an abbreviated language that reduces keystrokes. Dispatchers will need to learn this text or require the caller to talk in normal speech. Advanced call transfers. 911 calls could be received from potentially anywhere in the world. In the event that a VoIP call is routed incorrectly, they will need to be transferred to the correct call center. Our dispatchers are going to need to have that ability. Video and photographic triage and graphic incident information. Dispatchers may be receiving pictures, videos of other incidents, and may be expected to interpret what response is required based on the picture of an incident. What one person may think is important to an officer, the dispatcher may not care and say, my officer just doesn't care about what you're sending me. But to that person, it's extremely important that we know about it. There may be an exposure to traumatic incidents via photos and video that the dispatchers will be required to perform upon such exposure. For example, a dispatcher may receive a video of somebody committing suicide or a fatal traffic accident with a body part laying in the street. I don't know about you, but when I signed up to be a dispatcher 11 years ago, this just was not part of the picture. Dispatchers are very well trained to hear what the caller is saying, translate what they are saying, and relay that information to our first responders. With Next Generation 911, we're going to be asking our dispatchers to use their sense of sight as well as translate what the caller's trying to tell us. In addition to the training required to process this type of information, additional training is going to be required for the mental stress that the dispatchers could endure by being exposed to these type of incidents. Our field responders, they've been doing it for many years. They see this on a daily basis. They know how to deal with it. Our dispatchers do not. Dispatchers will have an advanced information available at their fingertips. Dispatchers will also have additional information and will be expected to access the information to assist dispatching in the appropriate personnel and equipment. We will expect them to access, review, and process this information immediately. Time sensitive, a lot of information is definitely time sensitive for officer or crew safety. Responders will be given additional call information prior to and during incidents. The responders are going to require information on how to handle this as well, probably another public forum. The public will require education and information regarding next generation systems, their capabilities, and definitely the limitations. Application developers will need to be educated and kept updated on the 911 system limitations and the requirements in order to develop applications and programs that are compatible with our California 911 system. In closing, the changes necessary to transition to a next generation 911 network and improving 911 in California are definitely significant. The next generation 911 systems from the perspective of public safety PSAPs and vendors will differ from what we are familiar with today. However, the basic concept remains the same. The public will dial 911 when they need help. Do you guys have any questions?
Brian, you brought to light a number of points, and I talked to Ryan earlier and asked a question about the fiscal points, and you alluded to some of those. For those of us, like my department, that subscribes to a joint powers authority for the PSAP handling of these 911 calls, you talked about all of the new technology, all of the new information and the educational requirements. How do you think that's going to affect our staffing needs? And again, it comes down to a fiscal question. I see us having a need to possibly transition from a comm center to a command center, perhaps. Again, a personnel impact from that standpoint. And then one of the things that from our service that we look at is the time element for a dispatcher to be handling that call. This is a lot more data, a lot more information. So does that translate into just a change in education, or is the time element going to result in some fiscal needs for personnel as well?
Thank you. I believe, Chief, that both issues actually need to be addressed, both the time element and a fiscal need. I think from my perspective, since I do handle your dispatch center, it would be important to me to make sure that all of our chiefs under our JPA are well aware of what we're up against. Make sure that they fully understand the fact that I can no longer simply ask an address of a caller and dispatch units immediately. I now have to maybe look at an address or look at a picture of a sign, take into consideration the latitude and longitude, or like Chris mentioned earlier, the altitude as well. To send out a response. I can definitely see our call triaging within the dispatch centers going from what we would prefer to be a 30-second to maybe even a minute call triage up to 2, 3, 5, 10 minutes just to get enough information to send out our responders. So it's definitely going to be, again, like I say, it's definitely going to be an educational issue. We've got to keep our chiefs aware. We've got to keep our Congress people aware of all of this information as well, so that they can give us the appropriate funding to react to what the public is expecting from us.
Brian alludes to the fact that San Bernardino County is one of the subscribers to his Joint Powers Agency, PSAP, as well as other agencies. And in effect, that means he sends me a bill every year. And we're concerned about that. Our constituents are concerned about that, and that's what I'm looking at, is that fiscal impact from that aspect, because currently, as I understand it, the 911 system itself, the SETNA funding and other issues and things like that really, for the most part, work on the technology side of the thing. And as manpower or the personnel side of the issue, I think is going to be impacted a lot more with the change in the new generation 911, and I think we need to be aware of that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Chief Salve, I just wanted to, Ryan Doolin with the State 911 Office. We have identified the operations component in our roadmap that was brought up just within our office, as well as the advisory board members bringing up issues from an operational perspective. So we'll be looking at more enterprise policies, that are going to be formulated at the state level, as well as considerations for local municipalities operating theirs. So we have a thorough analysis identified in that roadmap to work out those issues that you talked about. So that alludes also to the funding mechanism that I spoke to earlier. That's also one component in the roadmap. So I encourage you guys, Brian's well aware of the roadmap, and we'll be at the state level probably formulating focus groups. So Brian's very active in those focus groups, so you're well represented, but just encourage you to be active and keep up to date on those.
Any more questions from the panel? Okay, thank you very much. And I'd like just to take a moment to welcome Assemblymember Norma Torres for joining us today. Thank you very much. Okay, our next presenter is Daryl Whitmore, Vice President of Strategic Relationships at Intrado. He has over 17 years experience in public safety.
Thank you very much. Are we doing okay? Before I start my presentation, I would just like to give a little history of 911, and specifically 911 in the state of California. In 1968, 911 was designated the universal number, and the first 911 call was placed in Haley'sville, Alabama in February of 1968. Not to be outdone, the state of California rolled out 911 in 1970, very quickly thereafter. In 1974, the state of California received what was probably the first federal grant for the development of 911 in a state. And that was a $150,000 grant to Alameda County from the Law Enforcement Assistance Agency, which was pretty amazing considering what was done in California at that time. 1976, the first E911 call was rolled out in the state of Chicago, in the city of Chicago. Followed very quickly thereafter. By 1978, it was rolled out in Alameda County. What the state of California is doing now, and let me add, you were one of the first to roll out voice over IP for 911. You're one of the first states to roll out telematics. So the state of California has been a leader in 911 for many, many years. What the state is getting ready to do in next generation 911 is just one additional step in the leadership that California has played in 911. So now we'll go to the presentation. Next generation 911, then and now, we sort of did a little bit of the then. As soon as I figure out which button. Would you want today, when you call 911, to have a 1960s police car respond? Whoops, okay. You gonna get me back up, Paul? Thank you, sir. Is that me or? Okay, which button am I supposed to push, sir? Right or left? Right, okay, that's what I pushed. Would you want? It doesn't like me, Paul. You just want to take me forward? All right, take me forward. Next slide, please. Would you want this fire truck? Would you want this agency responding to you? Well, the technology that we have for 911 was developed in the 1960s and 1970s. Today, well before cell phones, satellite TV, microwaves were commercially available, PCs were commercially available, but yet we're using the same technology for 911. As has been indicated many times, 911 is not broken, no question about that. These men and women in this room that provide these services for the public of California do a great job with the 911 system that's in place today, rest assured. Next slide, please, Paul. Next Generation 911 is about technology. There's no question about it. We need to upgrade the infrastructure for 911. But it's not all about technology. It's about saving lives. Next slide, Paul. When you're ready, Paul. Thank you. Citizens' expectations. In 2010, a survey was done by a gentleman in Delaware who is a dispatcher in Delaware, very well respected in the public safety community on the East Coast, did a survey of 10 or 12 high schools around the country. The results are pretty interesting. How we communicate, how high school students communicate. 93% by cell phone, 6% PDA, 1% landline. When these students were asked when they would text a message to 911 or how they would call 911, the responses were pretty interesting. In a car accident or a house fire, the high school student saw no problem in using the voice to call 911. However, if there was an intruder with a gun, they fully expected that they would be able and could text 911, and that's how they would communicate. And this was demonstrated very clearly in Virginia Tech. The young students, men and women, that wanted to text for help couldn't. They could text their mother and father to say goodbye, but they couldn't text 911 for help. In this slide, I typically talk about persons with disabilities and what texting or being able to communicate via non-voice over a mobile device to 911. Since we have Richard Ray here today, a gentleman that I admire and respect, is going to speak after me, I wouldn't dare say anything at this point. Please. Next slide. Next generation 911 technology. We talk a lot about IP as we talk about next generation 911. I just wanted to be very clear that IP is not internet as we know it today or as our kids know it. This is a private IP network. We've talked about security issues, things like that. Rest assured that, next slide, Paul, if you would, that this is a proven technology that we're using. It's being used by Department of Defense, the federal government, Wall Street, banking, medical community, every day to handle highly sensitive communication, financial communication, and very mission critical application. And what we are creating is an application on an already proven and existing network. 911 and the things that will be provided with it to public safety, whether it be text messaging, applications like ShotSpotter, an application that determines when a gun was fired within a geographic area so we can alert the first responder and help protect the first responder. ShotSpotter applications, hazmat applications, building blueprints, those kinds of things, they're all just going to be applications on a very proven technology. The future of next generation 911, I think, was the first slide of Brian's presentation. It's the last slide of mine, and that is any device, anywhere, anytime. We keep referring to these calls or these requests for assistance as being calls or text messages. We don't know what they're going to be in the future. There are iPads. Will I be able to call and request assistance from an iPad, over email, over Facebook, over Twitter? Who knows? All I know is we need to be able to support that request for assistance and protect the lives and property of the public that we all serve. Thank you. Questions, I guess, we're supposed to ask first. I apologize. I was getting ready to give it to Richard. I'm so excited to give it to him.
Are there any questions from the panel? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next presenter, Richard Ray, is an ADA compliance coordinator for the City of Los Angeles Department on Disability. Mr. Ray is the current chair of the National Emergency Number Association, 911 Accessibility Committee and a co-chair of the Federal Communications Commission Emergency Access Advisory Committee.
Good afternoon. Thank you everybody for inviting me here. I asked Paul if he could possibly do the clicker for me instead of me actually doing the slides. I wouldn't be able to do that. Just like the hearing person, you wouldn't be able to talk with your mouth full. So the same thing. So I'm going to ask Paul to go ahead and do the slides. Everybody caught it. Good. I'm happy to be here. Thank you. Any questions for the panel?
Yeah, please. I first wanted to say thank you to the interpreters. I think you guys did a great job. Mr. Ray, do you have any data on the number of calls that the PSAPs receive, maybe nationwide, from the hearing or voice impaired on a yearly basis?
Yes, recently I collected some data and collected information from different providers that were out there. The average call per month is over 3,000. And that's VRS calls made to 911. Now, there are a few providers that have not yet given me that information and given me the numbers, but most of them did, so the numbers are very large.
I want to thank you for raising that issue. I think it's quite a challenge. The texting is, I think, going to be a challenge, and this is even more so, so thank you for bringing that up.
Great. Any other questions?
Ryan Doolin with the state of California. Thank you, Mr. Ray, for showing up. Appreciate you accommodating us at the last minute. What can the state of California do to make sure that we keep engaged with the persons with disabilities and making sure that you guys are fairly represented from your concerns and issues as we go into NextGen? I want to make sure that that demographic in California is represented.
There are a lot of different organizations that do provide services for people with disabilities. Also, they provide services for deaf and hard of hearing. And being involved in that process, it involves a lot of different organizations. APCO, APCO, NINA, different organizations that are involved. I am very fortunate to be involved on the national level, the Access Committee, and I work closely with those organizations and with other peoples as well, state and local levels in the state of California. I'm working with them. So it's very important, and we are involved. I am still currently involved with them. Karen Wong. She mentioned earlier that the Federal Communications Committee had set up a committee, and they were to provide access and consult the committee. This Emergency Advisory Council. There are various community-based organizations, different people that are involved, providing support and help for the Department of Transportation, the FCC, the Department of Justice, the National Emergency Number Agency. There are different organizations out there. We are very excited. We just set up an organization in California and to help the people in California. Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you very much.
Karen, I'd just like to add one thing. Thank you, Mr. Ray, for your comments. We also see some difficulty in our language-based translations that we see sometimes. I'd like to just add on to what Mr. Ray said with respect to that. The technology and the things and the expediency that he speaks to for the hearing and voice impaired, I think we run into some of the, Brian could probably talk to you better with respect to that, but we've had some difficulties there. And then another thing is, and I don't know if this really falls into this, the purview of this committee, but the ability of our first responders to be able to communicate through that same system in a reverse means. We've had incidents where we respond to a hearing or voice impaired residents, and we've had the difficulty with communication. So some reverse possibility would work with the first responders as well. I'd just like to add that. Thanks.
And actually, just a comment on our meeting that we had in San Diego. We had a medical professional give a presentation for us, and that was one of the things that he was looking for, was the two-way communication between the first responders. So we are taking that in consideration as we move forward. Okay, that concludes our presentations today, and it's now, we want to open it up for public comment, and we do have one person, Cindy Freeman. The public comments are limited to 3 minutes, and then there will be an opportunity for the panel to ask questions. Thank you.
Okay, I just have a question for the 911 office. We understand there's going to be a significant increase in costs for the next generation infrastructure and technology. In the past, PSAPs have relied heavily on their 911 funding allotment for the residual funds for additional equipment, like recording, 911 recording equipment, consoles and chairs and such. Will the new funding model be structured with this in mind?
Brian Doolin with the State 911 office. Again, we did identify funding as one of the issues that we need to tackle in NextGen. We outlined a pretty thorough tactical approach in the roadmap, so we will be doing analysis on that. I would imagine that the funding model is going to change in NextGen. What that looks like, we don't know. But we do know that it's an issue. We have resources that are going to be allocated to that to figure that out. And also, we're undergoing the cost of magnitude right now. Like I said, Karen has us doing an exercise to figure out what that might look like across the state and how much that will cost. That will all factor into what the funding model is, what the state's role into providing funds down to the local municipalities, and then what the locals can actually spend that money on and get reimbursed for providing 911 services at the local level. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Do you have a time frame on that, the new funding model? I'm just curious.
My time frame or Karen's time frame? Like I said, it's a sense of urgency in California for NextGen. So the cost of magnitude is going to be done probably within the next month. We'll have some estimates. We have a timeline in our roadmap that actually goes by phase in the different areas. But right now, because we don't know what the magnitude of this is, I can't give you a specific date. But as we get our plans together and as we identify those dates, they'll be shared not only through my office, but with the county coordinators. We're trying to improve that communication down to the PSAP level.
Okay. All right, thank you.
And just to add one additional thing to that, part of our process to come up with a funding model was to get through our public meetings to make sure that we knew what the expectation was for Next Generation 911, and so we weren't leaving anything out as we were going through the costing process. So we talked a little bit about at the beginning of the meeting. It's really important for everyone to respond to our inquiry, the 15 questions. It's really important to get your feedback as we move forward, and that will impact what the costing will look like on the project. Okay, that concludes our meeting today, and I want to thank everyone for attending. I want to thank our panel members, and I want to thank our presenters today. And I also want to thank Assembly Member Norma Torres for coming and participating in our meeting today. We will have the responses to the 15 questions posted early April for everyone, and just for everyone to know as well, FCC is interested in the responses because they're also gathering their data at the national level, so we will be sharing the information. And the meetings will be posted on the web, so if you've missed any of the presentations, you will be able to see at each of the different meetings. So I encourage all of you to take a look at that as well. It'll be on the California Technology Agency website. So thank you all today for your time. And I also want to thank the Ontario Police Department for all the accommodations, can't even say that today, it's been a long day, and for providing us this facility for the meeting. It has been really a pleasure. Thank you, everyone.